would be dusky bowels, parts of the intestine that had lost blood flow permanently and were now dead and had to be removed forever. I'd never heard the term dusky bowels before. It sounded like a good name for a fantasy football team. The doctor needed our consent before going ahead with the surgery. We didn't hesitate for an instant. In fact, we felt as if we had wasted enough of his time already. It's amazing how quickly you'll agree to a procedure like this once you hear talk of survival rates. You take a leap of faith. You trust that a total stranger will know how to properly disembowel your child because you do not. He was a nice-looking doctor. He seemed to know what he was talking about. Fuck it. I signed the forms. The doctor rushed back into the operating room to prepare, and a very nice NICU nurse named Kathy led my wife and me to our son, to see him one final time before he went to have his guts torn out. They had knocked him out with an anesthetic, so he was sleeping peacefully by the time we got there. He was in an isolate and had wires running from his mouth, chest, stomach, and foot. He looked like an IED. He was surrounded by a phalanx of adults who were all determined to prevent his death because the death of a child is the saddest thing in the world. He wasn't old enough or awake enough to know that he didn't want to die. We did all that worrying for him. Kathy opened the top of the isolate so we could kiss him on the head. Possibly for the last time. Possibly just another kiss in an entire lifetime of them. His head was coated with a shocking mass of black hair. When a baby is born premature, it still has plenty of the mother's hormones racing through its system. This can cause it to have enlarged genitals, lactating breasts, or a healthy head of hair. That hair eventually falls out and is replaced with new hair, but for now, our son still had hair long enough to get a side gig as a bassist. I bent down and let my nose glide along the soft fur, alternating between taking in his scent and kissing him on the head. I wanted to retain as much of the sensation as I could. Kathy led my wife and me back out to the general surgical waiting room. They had updates on the status, all the operations, listed on a big monitor at the far end of the room. We could check our son's intestines like we were trying to catch a connecting flight to Milwaukee. The second I saw my son's doctor and room number up on the board, I got a morbid thrill. There's my boy up on the TV! Then reality set back in and I could feel my heart withering. There were dozens of other people sitting in the room and I felt exposed, naked, without any armor to protect myself. I just wanted to find somewhere for my wife and me to cry ourselves sick. Kathy saw us visibly breaking down in front of everyone and stole us into a private waiting room. I sat down next to my wife and stared off into space because the rest of the world seemed empty to me at that moment. Desolate. We took turns telling each other it was going to be okay because it helps in times of grief, and someone you love tells you everything's going to be all right, even when you suspect it's a lie. All I could think about was my son dying. I tried my best to avoid it, but I couldn't. I wondered what would happen if his intestines were deemed unsalvageable. Do they euthanize your child? Do they just leave him until he starves to death because he can't fully digest anything? They can't do that. The world couldn't possibly be that cruel, could it? I envisioned being escorted into the morgue and holding a swaddled 9-day-old corpse in my hands, and how that would make me feel. He wasn't dead yet. I had a clear idea of how badly it would hurt. My heart was firmly clenched to absorb the blow. I thought about whether we'd have a funeral for him. I didn't think we would, because that would be just too awful to put our friends and family through. You can't herd people into a room and force them to stare at a tiny coffin for an hour. I wondered if he could donate his organs as a premature infant. I wondered if we would bury him or cremate him, and where we might scatter his ashes. Maybe the Atlantic Ocean. He might like that. Maybe we would get a dog if he passed away. A little dog named Otis or Kirby that would bark and yip and shit all over the place and help us forget about this. That might help. Maybe nothing would help. Maybe our marriage wouldn't survive if he died. We'd been married 9 years, together for 12. I remember the night we met in some shitty Manhattan bar that no longer exists. I staggered out of the John, and there she was, drunk and smiling, as if she had been planted there by some magnificent benefactor. It took 5 minutes for me to get her full name right because it was an obscure Armenian name, and I was too shit-faced to pronounce obscure Armenian names. God, I loved her. Only an act of extraordinary circumstances could possibly end us. A war, a natural disaster, an unspeakable crime, etc. And as we waited, I thought, perhaps these were those extraordinary circumstances. Maybe we would look at each other after this and see nothing more than a reminder of what was lost. Maybe we would drift apart, and I would become a filthy hobo, working odd jobs and dabbling in surfing and heroin. I couldn't stop crying. My wife stood in front of me, and I wrapped my arms around her waist and buried my head in her stomach. I told her all